Generation Z. According to current research, you guys are quite unique. Quite different from all of the generations of young people who've come before you. You see, there's this massive data set that's been collected by social scientists for several decades now. And it basically gathers information about how people like yourselves behave. And then social scientists, well, they use this data to compare different generations with each other. So, according to this data set, you guys, Generation Z, compared to my generation, Generation X, which is some 13, 40 years ago, roughly speaking, well, we're quite different from each other. And to begin with, you guys are having less sex. You don't do as many drugs. You don't drink as much alcohol. You don't smoke as much. And you spend way more time at home than we did when we were young. And so, I think the main conclusion that social scientists have been able to extract from studying this data set is that I had a lot more fun than you guys are having. But the reasons why these changes are happening are quite interesting, and it really boils down to one primary thing: our access to digital media and the internet. In the digital age, of course, we no longer have to leave the house to speak to our friends, and when we don't need to leave the house, we don't have to have as much access to things like alcohol or drugs or sex with other people, and frankly speaking, we just don't need them so much anymore. We have pornography and social media and online games. And yes, all of these things stimulate the same reward pathways in our brains without needing to put any effort into having to leave the house. But one thing is for sure: being a member of Generation Z means that you guys have got huge amounts of information about what you do, what you say, and what you think, being uploaded and stored forever in this constant online story about yourselves that you've been building ever since you've had access to devices. And your generation is the first generation that has had access to these devices ever since you were young children. Now, as you're probably aware, it's the first thing that we do as employers in 2023. We Google each candidate who applies to work with us. I mean, there are entire companies that are set up to do this on behalf of employers. Scour the internet for evidence that can be used against you. I mean, it frankly horrifies me to think that what I thought when I was 15 years old was written down somewhere for everybody to be reading when I'm 44. And yet, this is the calculation that you, Generation Z, need to be making all of the time. I mean, how the hell are you supposed to know what your 44-year-old self is going to find acceptable when you're only 15? It's hard enough just getting it right for today, not posting something that offends the wrong person or that makes you look anything other than a perfect version of yourself. No wonder that you guys, according to current research, are more anxious, more depressed, and more suicidal than any generation of young people in history. I was talking to a young lady here in my offices in Saigon just a few weeks ago. She had 3 Instagram accounts. One for close friends, one for acquaintances, and one for her family. And she sat there sobbing, telling me how exhausted she was at having to replicate her life 3 times over. All that she could tell me was how lonely she was and how nobody really knew who she was. That she didn't really know who she was either. All that she knew was that she wasn't any of the 3 people who she was online. And it's a strange expression, to know oneself. You know, to know oneself means you need to be the thing that is doing the knowing, as well as the thing that is to be known. It's a bit like an eye trying to look back at itself. You know, getting to know oneself is also not easy. In fact, it can be very painful. When you're a therapist, like myself, you learn that there are usually good reasons that a person doesn't actually know themselves. Very often, knowing yourself means needing to look at things you might find very difficult about yourself, things that you might have been avoiding for a long time, burying them deep down inside, hoping that somehow they might just disappear. And even if we do know ourselves, what exactly is it that we're meant to know? Psychology's answer to this question is to speak about this thing called the personality, a set of characteristics or traits that are consistent across situations and settings. You know, for example, a person who is high in trait extroversion is probably going to seek out social opportunities, while introverts at the other end of this trait dimension are probably going to prefer to spend time on their own. People who are high in conscientiousness are going to be more likely to meet deadlines and to work in the empirical sciences, while those who are high in openness to experience are more likely to be creative. They're probably going to be a psychologist rather than a doctor. Now, the fascinating thing about these traits is while they do change somewhat, particularly when we're young and when we're old, they tend to remain quite stable across the lifespan. We tend to continue to be the same person over time. You know, going to see that relative who you've not seen in a few years. They might have changed a little, but there's the sense that it's still the same person who, roughly speaking, still thinks and acts in roughly the same way, and it's kind of comforting to have this experience when we interact with the people who we know and trust. Now, like most things in psychology, some of this is explained by our DNA, and some of this is explained by the stability of the environments in which we live. But the most important thing to understand about our personalities is that they're shaped by what we want. Because the behavior patterns that make up a personality trait are not random choices. They're selected according to what we need, what we desire, what we fear. But most importantly, personality traits are shaped by the things that drive us. And the reason that our personalities remain so stable over time is because it's very difficult to change what drives us through life. But we can, with some focus and effort, override a certain personality trait in a given situation. We can teach an introvert to shake hands, make eye contact, and strike up a conversation at a company networking event. But when that event is over, that person is probably going to prefer to return somewhere quiet and have some alone time again. You see, there's a big difference between motivating somebody to do something in the moment and then being driven to do something over time. Motivation is usually short-lived. It's a context-specific thing. It can be satisfied with a particular outcome, like eating a bowl of noodles when you're hungry. Drive, on the other hand, drive is different. Drive is the thing that remains when motivations have been satisfied. Drive is insatiable. An introvert doesn't stop wanting to be introverted when they're satisfied by a little alone time, just like an extrovert doesn't stop wanting social interactions after a few parties. Drive is more about direction than it is about outcomes. It's more about process than it is about product. When I was 14 years old, my father used to wake me up at 4 a.m. every day. We would drive down to the beach and I would paddle out to my surfboard and watch the sunrise over the Indian Ocean before I went to school for the day. At 16, my parents moved me from Durban, South Africa, in the middle of summer to the north of England in the dead of winter. Now, 4 a.m. on the North Sea is not quite the same experience as an African summer. So I spent the first few months of my time in England mourning the death of surfing. Then I discovered mountain biking. Fun, adrenaline, solitude, landscapes. And a few years after that, I found myself living on the west coast of Scotland and hiking through some of the most breathtaking scenery I've ever seen. Today, 44 years old, I still ride and hike and surf whenever I can, and I still wake up before 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, I don't have any waves to surf before breakfast in my hometown here of Saigon, so I spend the first hour of every day meditating on the roof of my house, surfing through the mind. Now, I don't know exactly why I do these things. There's a common thread there. It probably has something to do with the connection to nature inside and out. I don't quite know, and I don't really care. I just know that when I don't regularly do these things, that life begins to lose its meaning. And to me, these activities are a pathway that I must follow, a category of action that I need to engage in to maintain my sense of who I am. Now, it's not my only pathway. I practice psychology to feed my need for human connection, and I read books about religion and philosophy to stimulate my love of ideas. You stumble across these pathways in life, almost by accident. Nobody really tells you where they are until you find them. But one of the things that I certainly learned in my work as a psychologist is that if we don't find our pathways in life, we can become very lost, very lonely, very unhappy. Finding your pathways through life and following these pathways is absolutely fundamental to your well-being. But to find your pathways in life, you need to go looking. And this searching is driven by a particular drive that all of us human beings are born with. Curiosity. Now, I'm not talking about the curiosity that your teachers tell you to have in the classroom, seeking questions that can be satisfied with answers. I'm talking about a deep and insatiable curiosity, just to know what's there at every opportunity that life presents. I'm talking about a curiosity that can never be satisfied and that always beckons you to look for more. Because it's not enough to simply stumble across your pathways in life. Once you find them, you need to keep going. And it's curiosity, not motivation, that drives you forward. So how do we do that? How do we connect with this kind of deep curiosity? I'm going to use 3 words that have really resonated through the field of counseling psychology over the past couple of decades, owing largely to the work of people like Stephen Hayes. Our curiosity lies in our willingness to be open, to be aware, and to be engaged. When we talk about being open, we're talking about a willingness to experience life in all of its forms, good and bad. Being prepared to look into all of the experiences that we have, including the ones that we don't like. Because very often in life, the things that you most need to see are hidden away in the places that you least want to look. Because for every bad experience that we try to forget, for every story of failure or shame that we tell ourselves, there's something that deeply matters to us in there, something that we truly value, something that drives us down our pathways in life. And a curious mind will go looking for what that is. And in addition to being open to looking into our experiences, we need to be aware of those experiences as they are happening. You see, the problem is that us human beings have become so clever at devising ways to switch off the emotions that we don't like with things like YouTube and social media, that we end up switching off our awareness of our experiences altogether. We build these habits of constant distraction. We become oblivious to what's going on around us and within us. You know, our emotional experiences are not something that need to be ignored. Our emotions are there to guide us along our pathways in life, that tell us when we need to change direction. Emotions color our experience in a way that builds this constantly evolving awareness of who we are and what matters to us. Approach your emotions with curiosity. See what there is to be learned. Boredom and anxiety are just as important as feeling motivated or fulfilled. Perhaps they're even more important. And lastly, a curious mind engages with life. It looks for opportunities to get involved, to try new things, to say yes to new experiences, to take risks. We simply cannot discover our pathways in life unless we're willing to step into the unknown, even if that frightens us. Curious minds don't sit around waiting for motivation to show up before they act. Curious minds understand that motivation is a luxury that sometimes carries us through, but more often than not, motivation only arises after we begin our journey, because we are engaged. Motivation drives us when we know what it is that we're looking for and when we have something specific to aim at. But it's curiosity that drives us to step into the unknown and to overcome our fear of doing so. Motivation is nothing compared to the grit, determination, and drive that sits at the core of a curious mind. So I want to finish today by addressing one of the words that I hear a lot from the young people who I work with. I often meet young people in my practice who tell me that they're struggling to find their purpose in life. This to me is a real problem of our age. The idea that we're meant to discover our purpose in life and that we have somehow failed and we don't have a firm grip on what that is. Purpose is not something that you discover in your teens or your early 20s and then spend the rest of your life aiming at. That really is the opposite of my message here today. Purpose reveals itself over time. Purpose is that it's something that we come to know when we look back over the pathways that we've been following in our lives and begin to join the dots. Purpose is not something that we can know before we have lived a life that can reveal that purpose to us. There's so many young people who I meet have their story completely back and front. So my message here today is this. Stop looking for your purpose. Open yourself and be willing to accept life as it comes, the good and the bad. Cultivate your awareness of what's happening around you and within you right now, and take a long, hard look at what it is that's distracted you from doing so. And then engage with the work that needs to be done right now. The things that you know deep down inside are calling out to be done. However hard those things might be, and however unmotivated you might be to do them. Approach your lives with the curiosity that you need to learn about who you really are and what truly matters to you. And then, one day, the far end of a life that has been worth every single minute that you have lived, you might be one of the people who looks back and discovers your purpose in life. Thank you very much. That's your talk.